Hi, so in this video I'd like to talk about damage meters and why I generally don't show mine. Sure, if you look, I mean, I've got quite a lot of kill videos on my channel. In fact, when I first made a YouTube channel, it wasn't for this, it was for just basically uploading kill videos, and you'll see plenty of damage meters on them, but usually it's just because I was looking at something between pulls and forgot to hide it again. It's quite common, but a lot of the times I don't forget to hide it. And I had some comments about why showing damage meters, why not damage meters. So I'm going to go over why, and actually why you shouldn't on progress raiding either. Now, the first thing I might say ordinarily is if someone says, why do you show damage meters, is, well, just look me up on Warcraft logs. However, recently you won't be able to do that because very recently our guild has decided to make our logs private, which means they can only be viewed by people who are in the guild. Now, why have we done this? Now, of course, we'll understand that the very top guilds will hide their logs because they don't want their competitors seeing what strategies they're using and getting a leg up on the back of it. That's not applying to us. We do it for another reason, and that reason is to stop people acting to increase their overall output, whether it be healing output or more especially DPS output. What's called DPS whoring or meter whoring. Now, why? Why doesn't it matter? I mean, there's the things need damaging. I can increase my damage on it. Why is that a bad thing? Well, I'm just going to go through with a few of the fights that we've done so far on Mythic Nighthold, explaining in each case why it can be a bad thing. Now, Scorpion, I'm not going to waste a lot of time on because we already know the situation there. To maximize your damage on that one, there'll be a couple of things you'll be doing. First of all, you won't mind terribly if you get knocked back or if someone else gets knocked back with a shockwave because it means more ads come in. Well, of course, you do more damage AoE than single targeting. So if you've got ads coming in that shouldn't be there, then you're going to do more damage. That is why Kira, who is the person who runs Warcraft logs and set it up and pretty much does it single-handedly, decided to remove it for like all-star points because it's ridiculous. People just pull extra ads. But there is another thing as well. When the exoskeleton cracks, that's when the boss is taking extra damage. You should really be single targeting even if there's a few ads up at the time. How many people actually do that? Let's be honest. How many people do that? Not many. And why do they do that? Are they thinking, well, the ads sort of should need to die quite quickly? No, they don't. They're doing it because it's going to increase the damage on the meters. Now, on Scorpion, you can argue it doesn't matter that much. Not many guilds will be in a position where they're not going to have the DPS to kill the boss in a reasonable amount of time. It's a relatively easy boss. But there are some guilds for which that will be the case. In fact, I often say, when it comes to like Heroic and Mythic, and I'm going to use this phrase a bit. There's a few videos I've got coming out in the next few days where there's sort of crossing themes. And one phrase that I use is that sometimes your best Heroic raider can be your worst Mythic raider. Because for Heroic, overall output, yeah, is pretty good. You're not likely to wipe the raid because you're maximizing your output. It's possible, but not likely. On Mythic, very likely. But from Scorpion, then we look at Chronomatic Anomaly. Someone pulled me up before. I keep calling it Chromatic Anomaly. Sorry, it's just a weird... I don't know why. It doesn't change colour or anything, does it? Chronomatic Anomaly. Changes time. Now on that one, very simple fight from a DPS point of view. Very simple. You're on the boss, then ads spawn. You go to an ad, you DPS the ad, interrupt it perhaps. 4 ads then spawn after it. DPS those down. A bit of AoE. Great. Nice one. But there's 2 ads on Mythic. One of them will have the boss dragged to it. So you're cleaving all the time. One of them is way over there. So you need a commando group to go way over there. So you're not doing any DPS while you're going way over there. And then you kill the ads and you AoE the other ads. And then you need to go back to the boss, which is now way over there. Now, which one is going to allow you to do the most damage? The one where you basically get to stay on the boss, but you switch to an ad that's near it and cleave. Or you have to go way over there and kill a load of ads and then travel all the way back. In fact, not even all the way back, further, because the boss has now been moved around. So it's a greater distance. And yes, there might be a Warlock Gateway. On our first kill, though, it disappeared. We were taking that many wipes to kill it. But which one's going to do the most damage? Obviously the one we get to see on the boss. So again, what do the damage meters on that one mean? Not a lot. And in fact, you get a situation whereby people then resent being in the group that has to go way over there because they're reducing their overall damage. But it needs doing. We need people to be able to do that and suck it up and actually realise that you're a cog in a team. And it's easy to see this, but liken it to football. And when I say football, I mean football. I don't mean that. So in football, if you're watching your favourite team and you suddenly see the goalkeeper get hold of the ball and dribble all the way down the pitch to try and get a shot on goal, don't score it, get dispossessed, and then someone from the opposite team just basically gets it to the halfway line. Your goalkeeper's trying to leg it back, and they just punt it into an open goal. Are you going to be pleased the goalkeeper did that? No, you're going to be shouting and screaming at them. That goalkeeper is not likely to be picked for the very next match. And the same thing happens here. You know, we're all DPS. You know, it's like we all want to maximise that output. But at the same time, that's not how the thing works. Damage meters and logs, bear in mind, are nothing. Blizzard didn't put those in the game. They're not a feature of the game. They're a third-party feature. Some people have come up with damage meters as an add-on, right? They're very useful when used correctly. But it's an extra thing. It's nothing that's intended as part of the game. Same with logs. Extremely useful. In fact, so useful that, you know, sometimes people come to me wanting me to look through their logs, and sometimes I've done videos on them to sort of show you how you can use Warcraft logs to improve your performance. Sometimes I've done it on my own logs. It's a very, very powerful tool, a very useful tool. But it's not part of the game. And a lot of people, what they just do is look at the overall damage. They don't look at all the other really clever features that Kira has put into them that you can use to your advantage. And again, so you get people who don't want to do that job. So then we move on to Trilliax. Trilliax, nice and straightforward, but it's not really a DPS check. Apart from the ads, you want to kill the ads, because on Mythic there's ads, quite quickly. But other than that, it's not a massive DPS check. If you've got the DPS to get through the first two bosses, you've got the DPS to do Trilliax. What's going to wipe you on Trilliax is mechanics. It's a mechanics fight. So there's cake that needs eating. Now, if the cake happens to spawn right next to you, no problem. Little sidestep, get a cake. Everyone's happy. If the cake happens to spawn a bit away, you have to move to it. You're not doing DPS. Then you've got to move back a bit more slowly because you've been debuffed. Again, not doing DPS. So people don't like doing that. In fact, one thing I do when I've been recruiting at the moment, and one, again, I don't want to talk too much about this, but one thing I've been looking at when I've been looking at people's damage, oh, that's good damage, and then I actually look at that fight and then see how much they're going for cake. And some people, you know, are like doing really well. They're getting lots of cake and doing lots of damage. Great. Some people not really going for cake. They're just letting everyone else do it. Now that's fine because there are never more cakes than there are people who can take them, unless people are dying. But if you're leaving it to others, you're not really part of that team. And actually, you're going to be contributing to wipes. I mean, when we were re-killing it, we killed it in a few wipes. It's a really easy boss. It's probably the second easiest after Scorpion. But when we were re-killing it, we wiped several times when we shouldn't have done it. It was all because of that. It was because cakes weren't being soaked. They weren't being taken when they were there. And that is what's going to wipe you on that boss. Then we move to Croesus. Now, Croesus is a very cleverly designed boss. I'm missing out L'Oreal. I haven't killed it yet on Mythic. I could talk about that. But Croesus actually highlights a really key point. Very clever design of boss, because some bosses are DPS checks, right? Very tight DPS checks. Croesus is one. It's not uncommon for guilds who kill it for the first time to kill it at the last second. In fact, we did it on the re-kill, and I've seen other guilds do it as well, where they killed it as the last bit of bridge was broken. So everyone dies, it's just the boss died before the last person died in the water. So you get the kill, but, you know, you're having to run back. And then wonder where Khadga's gone. So it is a very tight DPS check. So maximising your DPS on the boss, so crucial. However, there's another mechanic. There's the soaking mechanic. Now, this is a little bit different to on Heroic, only a little bit, in that you cannot hope to soak all of them. Now, we know that we want to soak all of them because everyone you don't soak, forgotten the name of it now, it doesn't matter. The burning pitch, something like that. If you don't soak it, an elemental spawns in its place. Now you've got to do DPS that elemental. On Mythic, they're 11 million health, roughly 11 million health. So for every one you don't soak, that's an extra 11 million damage that the raid has got to do. And also, if those ads are way out in the back, people are having to DPS that ad before then getting onto the boss. It's even worse. If they're at the ad, it's not at the boss, or it's not a big problem because you just cleave onto it. That's why we prefer to leave the ones near the boss. But it's still an extra 11 million damage you have to do. It's still, even if you're AoE and cleaving, probably taking DPS off the boss. You have to kill them quite quickly as well, otherwise they do a blow-up thing, and that will wipe the raid. It's not like it does a load of damage. It'll just wipe you. It'll just kill you. You'll die. So you have this double pressure. Some people would prefer when Burning Pitch comes out not to run back and soak because they want to carry on the boss, because there's that pressure on doing DPS on the boss. But if they don't, then the raid is having to do too much damage. That at the end of it might mean that you don't quite kill it. You'll have a 1 or 2% wipe instead of a kill. So there's that double pressure. And what people do, and in their heads they think to themselves, I'll run out at the very last second, which is fine. Maximise your DPS on the boss. But then if by doing that, you then don't have enough time to get yourself into a good position for soaking. I'll give you an example. When we killed it on the first kill, we had our little areas to go. So you go to a little area and then you soak whatever's best in your little zone. Now, I was on my zone. There was a spot to soak right on it. So I stood there and I looked behind me and there was a double soak because you can soak two at once if they're very close to each other. Now, that saves you an extra 11 million because now you're getting rid of two ads where you only get rid of one. So I was looking at it and I think in normal circumstances, I would go, okay, so I'll just move to that one because that's a double soak. But that was in a zone that should have been covered by someone else. And I was thinking to myself, okay, they're just going to get there at the last minute because they've got better movement than me. It was a demon hunter. They'll just be able to fell rush to it or something like that. So I was thinking, I don't want to move to it and then they get there at the last millisecond and I look a right tit because I've gone to where they should have been anyway. They'll have just said, well, I got there and I haven't soaked mine. So I stayed on mine because that's another thing you've got to do. You've got to trust in your team. I stayed on mine. But then they didn't go there. They didn't soak it. So, and you can think to yourself, well, okay, what did they soak instead? Maybe they soaked something else, but they could have soaked a double. Maybe they did soak a double where they were. So you think, well, they've still soaked a double. What's the problem? The problem is, I could have soaked the double as well. So we've still got at least 11 million extra health worth of damage to do that's not on the boss as a raid group. And it's those sort of things that wipe you. Then we come to Tichondrius. We've just killed Mythic Tichondrius. Mythic Tichondrius is absolutely marvellous. It's the last example I'm going to give. It's the last boss we've killed. But also, it highlights a lot of things about why you shouldn't be looking at damage meters. Now, with Mythic Tichondrius, there are a number of targets. You have two main phases. You have the boss phase and you have the bat phase. And it's much like on Heroic. Some of the mechanics work differently, but there aren't any really new mechanics as such. There's like a new ad, but that's about it. So in the boss phase, you've got damage on the boss that you want to maximize. You've also got damage on ads. Now, here's the thing. The ads spawn, the blobs that is, there are different types of ad, but in the first phase it's just blobs. They spawn in melee, there's 3 of them. They're taken out by the tank and DPS by ranged. Now as melee, I have passive cleave and I have active cleave. Now my passive cleave, that does a little bit of damage on them. That is useless damage because they're healing when they're near the boss anyway. But it's not a problem because I'm not taking DPS off the boss to do it. It's just passive. It's something that will happen regardless of what I do. But then there's active cleave. Now I could do a sneaky divine storm through them as they spawn. But if I do that, I'm reducing my damage on the boss. Now, we spent quite a lot of time. There's some guilds killed this boss in a few pulls. We didn't. We spent nearly 2 nights on it. Not quite 2 nights, but nearly 2 full nights on it. But quite early on, or relatively early on the second night, we actually did, or should have killed it. We had a, never mind 0.1% wipe. The boss had 2 million health left. Let's put it in that term. 2 million health, that's nothing. Now, let's say someone had done some cleave on that blobs to try and increase their damage on their meter, instead of focusing on the boss, because that's useless damage. That could have been the difference. That may actually have been why we wiped. 2 million's anything. Any little mistake anyone made could have caused that. But you need to think about that. So let's say I had a gone, oh, I want to pad my meters, and I Divine Storm every time those blobs show up, then, and we have a 0.1% wipe, whose fault's that? That's mine. But I didn't do that. Don't worry, I didn't do it. Then there's the pillars. Now, when the pillars spawn, of course, you all get behind this 4 pillars spawn. You know, you're in 4 groups. You all get behind your pillar. But you want only 5 people behind each pillar because the pillars will despawn, and they'll despawn according to how many people are there. So if there's more people behind one pillar, it'll despawn quicker, and then you're taking a load of damage. Now, what happened during the night, and I wish I could find the footage for it because I will crucify whoever did it, is there was one particular time, because sometimes as melee, you can DPS through the pillars. It doesn't block line of sight, but they're usually out of the boss. So you're out of melee range. So boo-hoo unless you're a feral druid. But sometimes they'll spawn right next to the boss. This is marvellous because it means we can carry on DPSing the boss while we're shielded. But one time it spawned right on the boss, which was marvellous for our group. So we would DPS in the boss there. But the pillar disappeared very, very quickly. I nearly died, and I wasn't the only one, because now we're taking this full damage. And that is because what someone has done, I don't know who, but what someone has done is they have said to themselves, oh, our pillar's way out there. Theirs is right next to the boss. I know. I'll just accidentally go behind the wrong pillar so I can DPS the boss. But the result of it is that we could have actually killed someone doing it because the pillar despawned. Again, another reason why having that damage meter there, because it's human nature. It's all right saying, well, I'm disciplined enough to ignore it. Some people are fine. Okay, I'd like to think I am. But when it's there, you've got an eye on it. Subconsciously, you might be doing the odd sneaky little thing, okay, that you probably shouldn't. Then comes the bat phase. The bat phase is very important. First of all, you get a couple of bats spawn, okay? When you kill those, each of them spawns another couple of bats. It's like a chain reaction. And every time a bat spawns, it spawns another couple. So you get an exponential increase in the number of bats. But you've only got a limited time period of that bat phase. Now, here's the thing. When the bats die, as well as spawning another couple of bats, they also leave behind an orb. If you pick up that orb, it gives you a damage increase. Now, we have people assigned to say, right, you spec to do maximum damage to the bats. We want to blow up the bats because everyone needs one of those orbs, because it's not just a damage increase. If you don't have one of those orbs, when the bat phase ends, you just die. You are one shot. Nothing will stop it. So there's 20 people in the raid. That in theory means you need 20 orbs. In reality, you need more than that because some people might pick up an extra one by mistake, or, well, you shouldn't be on purpose, surely. So you need more, many more. So you need to kill bats as quickly as possible, which means you have to kill those first 2 bats really quickly. Now, here's the thing. We're asking people to unload their most powerful abilities, not cooldowns. We need cooldowns for the boss fight when the boss is back again. But we're asking people to unload their most powerful abilities on, like, 2 bats. Whereas they might want to save it for when there's more bats. But the thing is, if people don't kill those first 2 bats really quickly, it'll be longer before we get the 4 bats. And then it'll be long before we get the 8 bats, and we may never get the 16 bats, if you see what I mean. So we need people to kill the first couple of bats really quickly. Then there's another thing. People will then naturally want to pick up the orb. It's damage increase. It means more damage on the bats. But who's better to pick up those first couple of orbs? Someone who's actually not going to do very much damage on the bats, or someone who's actually been assigned to blow up the bats? Obviously, it's the latter. But if you're thinking about your own personal damage, you'll want to try and pick up an orb as soon as possible. But that's then reducing our chance of getting enough bats killed. You're taking it away from the people who can do more bat damage, and that means we're less likely to get enough orbs. So then someone might die, or maybe multiple people may die because they weren't able to get an orb. So the reason why... And if we look at this, now, as I say, my logs aren't shown. Because you say to yourself, well, what did I do? Like, I know that if I want to do loads and loads of damage on Mythic Tichondrius, I will spec Consecration, I will spec a full AoE, and I will go mad on the bats. Now, that's fine. I can actually do a lot of damage on the bats, but it is reliant on a couple of things. First of all, the bats need to be grouped. Okay, we didn't do very well on that for a lot of times, but we did group them eventually. That's fine. But it needs to be grouped. I need to be in there and lay my consecration down there. Now, we've got people with brands of Argus. They need to get orbs as well. We need to try and get rid of a couple before we go into that phase. We don't get rid of all of them. And they can't obviously stack up on lots of other people. Otherwise, it gets blown up. Someone may die. The other thing is, it is reducing a little bit my damage on the boss by doing that. And if I'm going to do that, I need to get an orb early because, again, like anyone else, if you're going to be assigned on blowing bats up, you want to get an orb early. And whenever the bats were spawning, people were swarming them like vultures, and everyone was just running to get them. People just lacked the discipline of what I'm talking about, leaving the orbs, for the first few orbs at least, for people that could use them. So in the end, I didn't bother, and I'm glad I didn't, because when we actually did kill it, it was after the berserk, technically. Loads of people were dead. We almost had another very low wipe. In the end, it wasn't, because I focused on boss damage and not bat damage, because we had enough bat damage. We actually were killing enough bats. There were some people who spec'd for it, and that sorted itself out. And then there's one last thing I just want to talk about as well. I have never known this in my life. Sometimes you get someone doing a ninja pull. Now, a ninja pull, it's obvious why it happens. People are trying to maximize their damage because you've pre-potted. Now, you're pre-potting a second or two early, and by doing that, your potion's sort of ticking away. So you need to get damage on the boss ASAP. So cast is almost always cast. It's people with a cast time. Obviously, melee are not like to ninja pull because everything's instant, really, that you're using. But a caster, if it's 3 seconds to the pull, they've got a 3-second cast time. They want it to be landing just after the pull. They don't want to start casting when the boss is pulled because they've wasted 3 seconds of damage. That's understandable. But the problem is if you ninja pull, two things happen. First of all, some people may waste their pre-pots because they may be clicking it as you pull, in which case they're in combat, in which case they've got that pot, but they won't get their second pot later on. Ruinous on a boss like this. Ruinous, because that's a lot of lost damage. I mean, when you consider we had a wipe on 2 million health, we lose tens of millions if someone ninja pulls, potentially. It's that big a difference. Now, the other problem is that the boss inevitably moves somewhere else. So the tanks now have a problem getting it back to where it was. The melee that were on the other side, where it's moved away from, have got to move further before they can start DPSing as well. So the whole thing becomes a huge mess. And I have never known so many ninja pulls in one night as I've had experience in a whole year, as was happening on Tychondrius. I don't know whether that's just our guild being dumb as fuck, or whether that happens with others. I don't know. But it was spectacular how often it happened. It didn't actually happen on the very low wipe, I have to say. Otherwise, it would have been very obvious whose fault that was. In the end, we don't apportion blame to any one person on that one because no one did anything really stupid. But that would have been very, very annoying. And in fact, actually, it was ninja pulled on the kill, ironically. And so if that had been a wipe on a very low percentage, that would have clearly been someone's fault. But again, why do people do it? Because they're focusing on their own damage and forgetting about the fact that to maximize your own damage, and this is why I say about your best heroic raider can be your worst mythic raider, very often maximizing your own damage in terms of overall output, not damage on a particular ad, is reducing the overall raid damage. It's a bit like, again, liking it to football, it's a bit like you take actions, which means over the course of a match, you might score a goal. Let's say every time you get the ball, you want to be the one who shoots, even when there's better options to the left or right of you if you pass the ball. So you shoot, and let's say you score a goal, you feel vindicated, well, I've scored a goal. But you scored one goal in the whole match. Maybe your team could have scored 3 or 4 if you were unselfish like that. And it's the same principle here. So why do I have damage meters at all? If they're not relevant, why do I sometimes leave them on? The answer to that is, of course, with some fights, and Tychondrius is no different, there's a lot of fights like this, it's where the damage is done that's important. Sometimes when as well. We can't tell that from damage meters. We can tell that from logs. We can look at logs. Because one thing we can look at logs on is we can look at bat damage. I can look at that on a damage meter. But on the logs, I can see who's blowing up the first 2 bats. Okay, who's doing the most damage on those first 2. Because that's really important. But then you can look at yourself on damage meters, what damage you're doing on particular ads. So you can see what damage am I doing on bats? What damage am I doing on the Sightless Watcher? Because that's a really important add-on mythic for range to deal with. what damage am I doing on the boss? Okay, if what you're doing is focusing on boss damage. So all of these things are what you should be looking at, not your overall damage. Some fights, overall damage does matter. I mean, Trilliax, it sort of matters. But at the same time, you've also got to make sure you're soaking cakes. So you might say, well, I'm doing this amount of damage on Trilliax and the ad in Mythic. But what is my uptime on the stuffed debuff, which is what you get from eating the cake? So anyway, I don't need to go on too much longer than that. I've already gone on quite a bit, I think. So those are my reasons. Anyway, if people are asking why I don't put damage meters on, if you do see damage meters on a kill, it's just because I've forgotten to hide it again afterwards. But I do use them between pulls. They are useful. Logs are more useful, but sometimes if you just want to look up something quick and easy, a damage meter is fairly useful as well. So that's the reason it's there, but that's the reason why I don't like showing it when I'm actually progressing. And remember, a first kill is progress. You might see it when I do re-kills, because hopefully it doesn't matter so much then. But on, a first kill is by definition progress, so it's generally not shown there. So anyway, there we go. So I hope you found it interesting and useful as always. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share with other people for further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.